Welcome to the Teaching the Creative Arts video on reading music and the treble clef. If you want to follow in your textbook, we are looking at pages 167 and 168 in this video. So music is written on 5 lines called the stave if we're talking in British English, or the staff in American English. The plural of both of these is staves. And there you can see the 5 lines and the 4 spaces that music is traditionally written on. At the start of each stave there is a clef, and there are 2 very common clefs in music. The one you see on this slide is the treble clef, or the G clef. It is called the G clef as it draws a circle around the G line, but we talk more about what the G line is a little bit later. The treble clef is used for the higher pitches in music. So the first note that you sort of get in the treble clef is middle C, which sounds like this. And the treble clef outlines all the notes that are higher than that. And so on. The other well-known clef is the bass clef, or the F clef, which looks like this. It is called the F clef as the beginning of the clef curls around the F line, and the 2 dots that you see on either side of the F line. The bass clef is used for the lower pitches in music. So like the treble clef, it starts on middle C over here. But unlike the treble clef, it deals with the lower notes, for example, and all the way down to the bottom. Often when we see the treble and bass clefs, they're joined together. They're joined together by a brace. And when we see them like this, it's called the grand staff. And the treble and bass clefs are joined together, as I said, by a brace. Now, in this course, we're going to talk only about reading music in the treble clef, because that is what you need to be an intermediate phase teacher. So that is what we're going to deal with now. Notes can sit on the 5 lines of the stave, and if you have a look at this picture, it shows a note on each line of the stave. But notes can also sit in the 4 spaces of the stave, and in this picture you can see our notes sitting in the 4 spaces. Knowing the difference between whether a note is on the line or in the space is going to help us to learn to read music. So it's important that you can distinguish between these 2 pictures, the top one depicting notes on the line and the bottom picture depicting notes in the space. We name the lines and the spaces from the bottom up. And that is because we name our notes from the bottom upwards. So we always count from the bottom line, first line, or the bottom space, the first space. As I've said, we use the lines and the spaces to help with reading music. Have a look at the notes in the space notes. The notes in the spaces actually make up the word face. So if you see a note in the bottom space, that note is always F. A note in the second space is A, in the third space is C, and in the fourth space is E. So let's see if we can apply this to an example. Here we have a musical note, and we see that this musical note is in a space. And wherever notes are in a space, we're going to use the word face to help us name the note. So we go from the bottom upwards, and our first space is F, our second space is A, our third space is C, and our fourth space is E. Therefore, the note that we see depicted on the slide is an E. Try this with another example. First of all, we ask ourselves, is this note on the line or is it in the space? We can see that it is in the space as there is no line running through the middle of it. So we're going to use our letters face again. Our bottom space, we say F, Our second space we say A. Our third space we say C. And our top space we say E. This note sits in the second space and therefore it must be an A. Let's do it finally with this note. First of all, we ask ourselves again, is it on the line or in the space? And this is in the space, so we say face. F, A, C, E. The note that we see here is in the first space, and therefore it must be an F. Right, so like we use the spaces to help with reading music, we also use the lines. The notes on the lines are the letters E, G, B, D, and F. Unfortunately, not as easy as the word face, but to help us remember, we make up a rhyme. And the rhyme that I use is every good boy deserves football. If you prefer it, you can also use every green bus drives fast, or any little rhyme that helps us with the acronym E, G, B, D, F. So when we see a note on the line, the bottom line, that note is always going to be an E. If we see a note on the second line, it is a G. On the third line, it is a B. On the fourth line, it is a D. And on our top line, it is an F. So let's try to apply to an example. So we ask ourselves, is this note on the line or is it in the space? And we can see this note is on the line because a line runs through the middle of it. So we use our rhyme, E for every, G for good. This is in the second line, so it must be a G note. Let's try this example here. Again, we ask ourselves, is the note on the line or is it in the space? And we can see it is on the line and it is on the top line. So we go from the bottom. E for every, G for good, B for boy, D for deserves, F for football. So this note must be an F as it is on the fifth line, the top line. Let's try this example here. Again, we ask ourselves, is the note on the line or is it in the space? And we can see that it is on the line. The note sits with a line through the middle. And if we go from the bottom, we can say E for every, G for good, B for boy, D for deserves, F for football. So if we look up at this example, it is on the fourth line, so it must be a D. Now don't allow yourself to get confused by the fact that this note is a circle without a stem. It is the same note name in terms of A, B, C, D, E, F, or G as our previous examples. The only difference is that this note is a semibreve. Do you remember what a semibreve is? We dealt with it in the first lecture. A semibreve is a note that we're going to hold for 4 counts. If you pause the video and look back at the previous examples, those notes were crotchets. And crotchets are notes that we hold for 1 count. So the note name is not affected, just the duration or the length of note is different in this example. When we put our notes together, our lines and our spaces together, you'll see the notes look like this: E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. The pattern, you'll notice, follows the normal alphabet, but after G, we start at A again. There is no H or I or J in music. The music alphabet goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. Let's practice naming some notes. So the first thing you're going to ask yourself when you see a note is the note on a line or is it in a space? Which rhyme are you going to use? Face for notes that are in the space, Or E, G, B, D, F, every good boy deserves football, for notes that are on the line. And then thirdly, you're going to say the rhyme and name the note. Here are some examples for you to work through. Let's do the first two together. So the first note you'll see is in the space. So which rhyme are we going to use? We're going to use face, and we count from the bottom upwards. F, A, C, E. This particular note is in the fourth space. So the note name must be E. Let's look at the next one. The first thing you're going to ask yourself is this note on the line or is it in the space? This note is on the line. You can see a line running through the middle of the note head. So which rhyme are we going to use? We're going to use every good boy deserves football. We start from the bottom upwards and we say E, G, B, D, F. This note is in the second line, so it must be G. Take an opportunity now to pause the video and work through the other examples. When you are finished, unpause the video and check your answers. How did you do with that? Well, I hope. Let's go through the answers together. So the third note that we see is on the line. So we're going to use every good boy deserves football. And we can say from the bottom up with every good boy deserves. This note is D. The next note is in the space. So we use our word face. We say from the bottom F, A. This note is A. Let's look at the next four notes. Here are the note names. E, D, A, E. And our final four notes are D, A, B, F. So far, we've only looked at notes that sit on the 5 lines or in the 4 spaces of the stave, but music notes can actually occur on either side of the stave as well. Think about how big a piano is. There are 88 keys, and the stave that we've looked at only has the 5 lines and the 4 spaces. So the way that these extra keys are shown on the stave is in ledger lines. Here you can see a ledger line just below the stave, and this note is our note middle C. We'll talk a little bit about how to name these notes shortly, but first of all, just also to point out, notes below the middle line have the stem going upwards and the note stem is on the right side, while our notes above the middle line have the stem going downwards and the note stem is on the left side. So let's look at how to name these notes that appear in these ledger lines. The two on the left-hand side, perhaps you don't know how to name yet, but let's look at what we do know. We know that the space notes make up the word face. So we know that this note here is F, this note is A, and this note is C. We also know that our line notes are every good boy deserves football. So we know that this note here is E, this note is G, and this note is B, every good boy. If we look at the sort of combination so far, we've got E, F, G, A, B, C, which follows our pattern of our alphabet, doesn't it? And we've already learnt that the music alphabet goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So we know that if we go to the right, we are going up the alphabet as normal, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Therefore, if we go to the left, we have to think about the notes that come, or the names of the alphabet that come before this letter. So let's look at our letter E. What letter in the alphabet comes before E? A, B, C, D, E. So therefore, this note here must be a D, as it is just lower or just next to the E. Let's have a look at this note here now. This note is just next to D. Therefore, it must be the letter in the alphabet that comes before D. If we say our alphabet, A, B, C, D. Therefore, this note must be C. And if we check, our notes now go C, D, E, F, G. A, B, C, which follows the pattern that we know is true for our music alphabet. This might look very confusing to you. These are all of the notes of the treble clef, and you can see the treble clef goes all the way down from G on a very low ledger line, all the way up to E on a very high ledger line. This is just to show you that ledger lines can continue and can go much lower and much higher than the ones we've done in this course. But for the purposes of this course, you only need to know how to name these notes. So from middle C, all the way up to the G that is just above the stave, those are the notes that you need to know how to name. Right, so here's some practice for you. Pause the video at this point and see if you can name these notes. Good luck. When you're ready to check your answers, you can resume the video again. Right, how was that for you? Hopefully not too hard. Let's go through them quickly. Our first one is a line note, so we say every good boy, and it's on the first line, therefore an E. Our second note is a space, so we say F-A-C-E. Our third one is also a space, F-A-C-E. Our next note is a line note, every good boy, so that is a B. Our next one is in a space, so we say face, and it's the first one, so it is F. Here's one of our funny notes that doesn't sit on the stave, it sits on a ledger line. And if you remember what we've just covered in this previous slide, this note on its own little ledger line is C. The next note is in a space, so we say F-A-C, also a C. Let's quickly talk about the difference between those two C's. The first C will be much lower than the second C, and that is because it is lower down on the stave. Right, our next note is on a line, so we say every good, and it's a G. Our next note is one of those strange ones again. It doesn't appear on the stave. But if you think back to the slide we just looked at, it is just below an E, and therefore it must be our note D. The following note also doesn't appear on the stave, but let's think about the top line. We know the top line is F, every good boy deserves football. This note is right next door to F, and therefore it must be G. And our last note is on the line, every good boy, D, deserves. If you have very big problems with this and you don't understand how to name notes, please make an appointment to see me so that we can work on it together. Thank you and good luck. There is a quiz that you can complete now on ECI. Good luck with that.